Hello and welcome to Dice and Demons. I'm Emma, and today I want to show you how you can use a big flat surface on a model to do a really cool and very colorful pattern. So this can be used on any type of model that has some big flat surfaces to work with. That could be like knights or tanks or dreadnoughts or whatever for like both Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40,000, and of course all sorts of indie and skirmish games. And for this project today I am using a model that is called Rue Carapace. I love that name, which is for a new skirmish game that's just coming out. They have a campaign for it now, and I'll link to that in the description. And the game is called Grid Wars 2.0, and I think it sounds really fun. So full disclosure, this model, along with some other models for Grid Wars 2.0, was sent to me by the people at Only Games, which is part of my mini factory. And the people who designed the models and the Grid Wars 2.0 game, Titan Forge Miniatures, they have also sent me some terrain and stuff that I'll be doing a separate video for later on. Just, it doesn't really have any bearing on the painting video itself, but now you know. So as you can see, I took out a pencil and I started just drawing in a design, and I decided I wanted to have sort of a border around the main design because the surfaces are so big, as you can see here, that I thought it would look a little bit strange if you just had had the design just go all the way out to the edges. Or I mean, I'm not sure it would look strange, but I thought, why not just up it a little bit instead of just having one type of design? Then you can do the border and it would look a little bit more fun, and you can use even more colors, which is of course always great. The more colors you can use on a model, the happier I am, at least. When I was happy with the painted design, and by the way, the designs, they don't really mean anything. It's just a graphic look I thought looked cool. So, I mean, you can draw anything you like. This was just something that I thought was relatively easy to do, and also would be something that was actually realistic to, you know, color in later on and actually do highlights and stuff. If you do them too small, it tends to look a little bit more chaotic, but also cool. But it also means that it's a lot more work to make it look sharp and defined, which I think is sort of the key to this type of painting process. As you'll notice, before I painted everything black that I'm not going to be painting designs on, and that's simply to save a little bit of time, because your eyes will instantly be drawn to the designs anyway, so there is not a lot of reasons to spend a huge amount of time on anything else. And also because black will make, of course, the fluorescent colors that I'm going to be using later on pop even more. So now I'm taking some Achillean green. This is a contrast paint from Citadel, and I am just sort of retracing the steps I started painting in with the pencil, just to make sure that it's easy for me to see once I start using a lot more color. I could also do this with a darker color, but I find that this is the most sort of discreet color for this sort of project, and that means you can easily correct mistakes if you make any, which I tend to do quite a lot. Next up, I grab another contrast paint, and this one is called Croxigor Scales. And I do a really quick wet blend with that and striking Scorpion Green, which is also a contrast paint. And this is one of the reasons why I like painting with contrast paint so much. It's just really easy to do a quick wet blend. As you can probably tell here, it's not a perfect wet blend by any stretch of the imagination, but it works out just fine. I'm going to be covering it later on with other colors, so I don't need it to be like perfectly smooth, but I need it to be a sort of roadmap for me to follow when I'm going to be doing my highlights at a later stage. And so for that, it just works really well. I think painting this entire border took me, I have speeded up the video a little bit, as you can probably tell, but it took me perhaps a minute or two, which I think is quite quick for a for drawing what is basically just a sketch that it will be so easy for me to follow later on. After that, I grabbed another contrast paint, and this one is called Volupus Pink, and I started to paint in the shapes or the patterns. Most of them are more or less shaped like triangles, and that's because that is a little bit easier for me to paint, and it will still look cool. If you do more organic shapes, it will also look really nice, but they are a little bit more time consuming to just get completely right. And so for a project such as this, where I'm going to be painting on so many surfaces, I tend to use slightly more geometric patterns, if that makes sense. You'll also notice that I do this first before I paint in all the rest of the colors. Of course, it can be more time efficient to, paint every single thing you want to be pink and then grab another color instead of switching around. And that's just because I want to make sure that I'm actually happy with the color scheme I'm going with here. So I only just sort of paint one armor plate before moving on to the rest of the model. The other color I'm using here for the geometric shapes, the tiny triangles, is Gryph-hound Orange, which is of course an orange contrast paint. I decided I was quite happy with the color scheme, so I just went ahead and painted up the rest of the model as I did with the first armor panel. Then I could start highlighting, which is one of my favorite aspects of painting patterns like this. I'm just a little bit weird that way. I just think it's really satisfying and fun. And the first layer of highlight I got out was a orange paint from Huge Miniatures, and this one is called Laser Orange. And if you also want to have some really nice fluorescent paints for yourself, I'll leave a link with a discount code for Huge Miniatures. It'll give you 5% off, and it will also help support this channel while you are shopping. Next up, I started highlighting the pink triangles, and for that I used first a Pulse Wave Pink, which is also a paint from Huge Miniatures. And you'll notice that I both, of course, try to be as accurate as I can just to not mess up the shapes. But I also really try to make sure that I leave the darker contrast color underneath very visible. And that's because it adds a little bit both of sort of definition to the shape and also adds some contrast, which just tends to give more visual interest, which I really like in a shape such as this. It just helps to enhance the pattern, at least in my eyes. For the second layer of highlights on the orange, I grabbed some Starfire Yellow, which is also from Huge Miniatures, and I try to sort of only touch 2 out of the 3 sides of each triangle with the Starfire Yellow, just to make sure that it doesn't look like we are now just working with sort of very bright yellow triangles, but they still look like they're orange with a highlight. And I try more or less to paint the brightest highlight at the top of each triangle. I'm not trying to make it look like there is any sort of natural light source or anything that is giving off these highlights, but I do find that it helps the model look just slightly more cohesive if the highlights generally points upwards or more or less in the same direction anyways. Then for the second layer of highlights on the pink, I used exactly the same method, and for that I'm using a color called Cyber Pink. Originally, I was just gonna stop there with these 2 layers of highlight, but then I thought it needed just a slight touch of something more. And so I added, just as you can see, a tiny little dab of a Wraithbone to the tip of the orange triangles, and a tiny little dab of the Cyber Pink paint mixed with some white. This was the matte white from the Army Painter, my favorite white color. And as you can see, it's just a teeny tiny dab, and that's because I really don't want these to look like they are now just sort of beige and sort of baby pink. I just want it to be a slight highlight that really makes the colors pop just a little bit more. After I was finally happy with the highlights, I grabbed a black contrast paint. This one is called Black Legion, and I used that to draw a black outline around each and every single shape that I had painted on the armor. And this is a little bit of nervous work because I really didn't want to screw up and then have to go over all the steps that I had just taken to highlight it. So I'm always slightly nervous before I begin to do this, but I find that it just enhances the overall look so much that it's definitely worth it, even if you do have to go back and correct some tiny mistakes that you might make. Generally, I find that when you're working with geometric patterns such as this, it just really pays off to take the time to make sure everything is as sharp and as precise as you can possibly get it. Then I started to work on the edges around the geometric designs, and I have to say this is not my favorite part of the painting process because this involves me having to actually do glazes and stuff, and I'm not very good at it and I'm not very comfortable doing it. So yeah, this was a part I had sort of pushed until last just because I didn't want to do it, but after everything else was done I kind of had to. So for the blue parts of the armor trim, I mixed up some Blaster Blue and some Gamma Green from Huge Miniatures, and then I mixed in a little bit of Achillean Green with that just to help darken it up a little bit. And then I just went with, I think, 2 or 3 mixes of that, and then ended up with some of the gamma green in the middle of the armor panel, and then I could mix that with an even lighter shade of green, which was called quantum green. And then I just did I don't know. I probably should have done more layers of glazing and more transitions to get it to be like entirely smooth. But as I said, this is not the part of the painting process that I'm best at. And so I tend to try and work as quickly as I can, which I know is not, it's a terrible way of getting better at something. So I should probably stop doing that. For the final layers of highlight for the green parts of the border, I again used a little bit of the Starfire yellow that I also used as the final layer of highlights on the, the next to last layer of highlights on the orange triangles in the geometric shapes in the armor panel. And here you can see the finished result. It was actually surprisingly tricky to get a decent photo of this mini after it was painted. I think it had something to do with, I don't know, too many bright conflicting neon colors for the camera to actually know what to focus on. I'm not quite sure. It looks a little bit lighter in real life, while at the same time not it is still as saturated to look at, just slightly lighter. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyways, here you can also see it under a UV light. And of course, since I painted it with fluorescent colors, it's really gonna pop under a UV light. And it just looks, I don't know. It looks like a robot that's ready for the Mardi Gras or something, or the carnival or something. I'm not sure. I think it looks quite fun. It was definitely fun to paint, and it was fun to come up with the patterns and everything. So, before you leave, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank my patrons who help support this channel, and I'm really grateful for that. So thank you so much to Thomas Madsen, Scott Broadway, Jordan Hollins, Andre Correa, Anthony Polcastro, Queen's Wolf, JJ Walsh, Gwynael, Mola Mola, TJ Kubiak, Mando Project, Starcon85, S. Beer, Echinocicus, Firelord21, and Elliot Philby. If you would also like to join these wonderful people in supporting this channel, you can do so over on Patreon, and I will of course leave a link to that in the show notes. And of course, thank you as well to Only Games and Titanforge Minis for sending me this model and the rest of the stuff for Grid Wars 2.0. I will leave the relevant links down in the description as well. Also remember, you can always follow me as Dyson Demons over on Twitter and Instagram, where you can stay up to date on my painting projects. And on Instagram, I actually just hit 14,000 people who are following me, so I think that's quite huge, and I'm very excited about that. So thank you to everyone who's following along over on Instagram as well. So let me know what you think of this model, if you have other ideas for future painting projects or color schemes you'd like to see me try out and stuff like that. Any sort of thing, let me know in the comment section and I'll do my best to get back to you. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.